Greetings, precious friends. Welcome back to the Carnivore Hippie channel. Thanks for joining me again today. We're back in my kitchen, as you can see, and today we're going to do one of my favorite recipes, which is my version of the carnivore egg white bread. This is a real handy thing to have around. You can make sandwiches out of it. You can make French toast out of it. It's great toasted. It's just so versatile, and you can use it for anything that you would actually use bread for. Except for, it doesn't make really great breadcrumbs because of its really, really super high protein content. But, if you need breadcrumbs, you use pork rinds anyway, don't you? Anyway, let's get started. First thing we're going to talk about is hardware, as usual. Come on, turn around, you. There we go. Right here we have a 9x13 sheet cake pan. It's also called a quarter sheet pan. It's 2 inches deep, and it has a sheet of parchment paper cut to fit the bottom of it. I really don't recommend you do this recipe without lining the bottom of your pan. This batter can stick just horribly and irretrievably. If you don't have parchment, go ahead, feel free to use aluminum foil. I've never tried wax paper, although if you don't mind the paraffin, it should be safe. It won't catch fire or anything, but there will be trace amounts of paraffin in your recipe. So I've kept parchment in my paper for years for when I was doing other kinds of baking. So it's just a habit for me to keep it. And I will show you how I prepare this parchment in just a minute. You're also going to need as always, a silicone scraper, some kind of spreader, a pastry brush for preparing our pan. We will also need a whisk, which you can see I've already used to beat up some cream cheese over here. But you'll need that, a whisk. Stay there. Okay. You'll need also a couple of bowls to separate your egg whites and egg yolks, because you're going to need to separate your eggs. And you will also need an electric mixer. I don't think anybody other than a bodybuilder could actually whisk these egg whites by hand. I expect even a bodybuilder would have trouble with the stamina that it would require to do this by hand. This is actually a 3-quart bowl, which is plenty big enough. You can do this with an electric hand mixer, but you make sure you have a big enough bowl. You'll need at least a 2-quart bowl, which is larger than most of the mixing bowls that you can find commonly on the market. You may have to go to a restaurant supply store or order it offline, but most bowls are 1.5 quarts. That's just not going to be big enough. You're going to end up spilling your mixture all over the place. You're not going to be able to keep it in the bowl as you mix it. So you can do it with a hand mixer. Once again, you cannot do it in a food processor, but you need at least a 2-quart mixing bowl. So now let us talk about software. I have here some room temperature butter for preparing the pan. I have in here, this is an ounce of cream cheese, block cream cheese, not the whipped up kind, not the pre-softened kind in a tub, the kind that comes in a regular block. And it was softened to room temperature, and I used the whisk to beat it up until it's all nice and soft and creamy, and there's no hard lumps in there. We will need 6 eggs separated. I have some of them separated, but I left some of it undone because I'm going to show you in just a minute how I separate my eggs. I find it's really easy, and this is the way I've been doing it for years. We also have a half a teaspoon of salt mixed with a half a teaspoon of xanthan gum. You can leave the xanthan gum out if you want to. It's not strictly necessary, but I find that it stabilizes the batter and gets you a fluffier product, a more bread-like product. This is 2 tablespoons of allulose, powdered allulose. Now, you can also leave this out. This is not enough to make the bread taste sweet. Well, what it does is it provides a substrate for browning, for caramelization. If you leave this out, just be aware your bread will not brown. It will be very, very pale. It'll still be done, but it just won't be brown. So do this or not as you will. Erythritol won't work. Erythritol doesn't brown. I've never tried it with xylitol, so I don't know, but I do know that allulose is what's called for in most of the other recipes I've seen, so that's what I use. Do it or don't. If you want it brown, do it. If you don't care and you'd rather leave it out, go ahead. Here we have a teaspoon of baking powder. Don't leave this out. You'll need it. It helps with the rise and helps keep the bread fluffy and helps it to not fall when it comes out of the oven. Okay. And here we have, and this is not optional, I'm afraid. This is a half a cup of dried egg white powder. That's all it is. It's just plain old dried egg whites. There's no additives. There's no anti-caking agents. It's nothing but egg whites. This is Judy's brand. If you're not familiar with using egg white powder, I will link in the description box below, along with the recipe, a couple of links where you can get it online. I order mine online from a company called Judy's. It's great. There's also a company called Just Something. It sells a whole bunch of stuff called this, Just Eggs, Just this or just that. The one I've used also is called Just Egg Whites. But anyhow, some people mistake this for meringue powder. Like Wilton sells meringue powder. Other cake making companies sell meringue powder. This is not meringue powder. Meringue powder has other kinds of stabilizers in it, and I don't recommend meringue powder for this application. Okay. The other thing I want to say about egg white powder is if you're working with egg white powder, you absolutely must keep everything that comes in contact with your egg white powder completely and absolutely bone dry before you incorporate it into your mixture, because otherwise you will have giant problems. It will solidify into hard little lumps that are, or even big lumps that are completely impossible to break down. If I dropped drops of water in this right now, I would have to throw it out and measure out a new batch. Okay, so absolutely bone dry until you're ready to incorporate it into your mixture. Okay. All right. So that's, one last thing. One last thing. This is a half a teaspoon, or a teaspoon rather, of instant fast-acting yeast. Yeah, I know, calm down. And a half a teaspoon of sugar. I know, just bear with me. And 2 tablespoons of warm water. This is for flavoring. This cuts down the flavor of the egginess. It gives it a more bread-like smell. I think it just makes the whole thing more pleasant to eat. You can see the bubbles. You want to mix this together. You want your water to be about between 90 and 100 degrees. And then you want to set this aside. This has been about 15 minutes. And just make sure that it has begun to bubble. Okay? All right. So again, this is just for flavor. You can leave it out, but the bread will taste pretty eggy. If you don't mind that, just you do you, boo-boo. But I like the aroma and the taste that this gives to the bread. And don't worry about the sugar. There's a half a teaspoon in here. That's about between 2 and 3 grams of carbohydrate. And the yeast are going to consume a lot of that and turn it into carbon dioxide. So by the time this is all said and done with, there might be a gram of carbohydrate in this entire added from this in this entire recipe. So I don't think there's any need to be afraid of it. Okay. So here we go. First of all, what we're going to do is we're going to prepare our pan. And what I'm going to do first is take the sheet of parchment out. We're going to load our brush with some butter. And we're just going to brush the bottom of the pan. Now, brush the bottom of the pan real well. Do not brush the sides of the pan. And I will explain to you why in just a little bit when we get there. Just the bottom. It's probably going to take a tablespoon, as much as a tablespoon, as little as 2 teaspoons. But you want the butter to be room temperature, not real cold, not real warm. Because this is going to hold your parchment paper still. Put this down. Now, there's plenty of places that will say you don't need to grease the parchment paper, but there are plenty of places that will say that you should. I personally do. I always have. It's just, to me, it's a matter of insurance. It takes a minute and a couple of teaspoons of butter, and that seems to me a pretty darn cheap insurance policy, if you ask me. So I always do it. Again, avoid... See, I got some on the side there. I'm going to wipe it off. Avoid greasing the sides of the pan. There we go. That's ready. See? Easy peasy. You're done with your pastry brush and you're done with your room temperature butter. We're going to set this aside. Now, what I'm going to do is I'm going to show you, since separating your eggs is really important, I'm going to show you how I like to do that. First of all, I'm going to show you how I crack my eggs. Some people find it nerve-wracking to separate eggs. And in my opinion, some people find it nerve-wracking because they do it the hard way. Because maybe they just don't know that there's an easier way. You can see there's one in here. And that's in there for a reason that I'll show you in a minute. So first of all, to separate eggs, believe it or not, cracking the egg is important. And the way you crack it is important. Do not drive the egg down onto the rim of the bowl. That's what a lot of people do. I don't recommend that. What I recommend is on a hard surface, obviously this is marble, granite rather, on a hard surface, tap the egg and you'll be able to hear if it cracks. See? It's cracked, right? You crack it, and then you rotate it a quarter turn, tap it again, rotate it a quarter turn, tap it again, rotate it a quarter turn, tap it again. That way, you've cracked it all the way around the center, and you should have a crack circling the egg, which makes it really easy to open. And if the egg is easy to open, the chances of you crushing the egg shell accidentally and putting your thumb through the egg yolk are greatly decreased. So here's a little divot. You can just put your thumbs in. You can see how easily it just pops right apart and down into the bowl, and it's nice and whole and undamaged. Now, the way I separate my eggs, and I'll do this twice, excuse me, so that you can see it. The way I separate my eggs is I just scoop, let me do it with this hand, scoop down into the bowl, get my fingers under the egg, and you can see that the egg white is starting to fall off. Just jiggle it between your fingers. The fresher these are, the more they cling. If it's really clingy and it doesn't want to fall off, you can gently pour it to the other hand. And sometimes, most of the time, that action will cause it to let loose. So see, there you go. Really, really is easy. One more time. Scoop. Jiggle. Part your fingers a little bit. See, that one I didn't even need to switch hands. There you go. We have 6 egg whites in this bowl and 6 egg yolks in this bowl. Give me a second. I gotta rinse my hands. Now, we're going to do everything that we're able to do before we whip the egg whites. Whipping the egg whites is going to be the last thing we do before we fold everything together and put it in the pan. So we have our cream cheese beaten up nicely. Make sure there's no lumps in it. And we're going to add these egg yolks. We're going to add 1 egg yolk. And the reason we're going to only add 1 egg yolk is because we want to emulsify this cream cheese with the egg yolk. And we're going to mix this until there's no more lumps. If you put all the egg whites in at one time, the mixture gets too runny. And the little lumps of cream cheese just kind of go round and round and round and round. And it's really difficult to get them incorporated. This way, 1 egg yolk emulsifies all the cream cheese. See, no lumps, nice and creamy. And then you can just boop, there you go. And no little lumps of cream cheese going around and around. If you have teeny tiny lumps of cream cheese and like maybe the size of a grain of rice or something, that wouldn't be such a bad thing. It'll work. Oh, and I forgot one thing. As far as our software, I almost forgot. Here we go. That is 1 ounce of melted butter. So now that we have our egg yolks and cream cheese, we're going to add our optional yeast liquid. And we are going to whisk in our melted butter in a reasonably slow stream. We're not making mayonnaise here, but we don't necessarily want to just dump it all in because we want it to emulsify. There we go. You can see it didn't take very long, right? And you can see there's no butter slick. There's no butter slick on top of this. It's all creamy and emulsified. Okay? So now we're done with the whisk for the time being. I'm going to get it out of the way so it doesn't make a mess. We're going to set this aside because now we've done everything we can with everything besides the egg whites. We're going to come over here now to our mixer. And we're going to introduce our 6 egg whites. You can make this recipe without egg yolks, and you can make it in a loaf pan. But I mean, Maria Emmerich has a really, really good videos for about how to do that, but I have found that I'm really not fond of the texture when it has no egg yolks in it. I don't really do the protein sparing modified fast sort of thing. I do like a high fat diet. I find that it's much better for my mental health, my mood, and it's much better actually for my gut that I find. So we're going to get that started. We are going to add our allulose powder. People say, oh, let it get foamy before you put the allulose in. I don't think that's a big deal. You may notice I'm raising the speed of once I put the allulose powder in, I'm raising the speed of the mixer gradually because I don't want any allulose powder that's stuck on the top of the egg whites to fly out of the bowl. But we're going to crank it all the way up to as fast as it'll go. And the reason I've turned it off is because this is really noisy and you will never be able to hear me talking while this is going. So this is probably going to whip for 3 or 4 minutes, maybe as much as 5 minutes, until the egg whites get nice and tall and fluffy and have stiff peaks. And then we will proceed with the rest of the recipe. I will see you then. I'm going to pause the recording. Okay? See you in a minute. Hello again, precious friends. We're back. I want to show you now where we're at with these egg whites. You can see they're completely stiff. See? Whoops. They don't go anywhere. You could take this bowl off and turn it upside down. See, you can, whoop. See the stiff peak? That's what we want, okay? They're just about quadrupled in volume. Now, here is our salt and xanthan gum. We're going to sprinkle that in. Mix it just softly for just a second until it's mostly incorporated, and then we're gonna crank it up again. That was about 30 seconds or so. Now you will notice that the egg whites have gotten much creamier in appearance. This is the effect of the xanthan gum. This is going to get stiffer in a few minutes because the xanthan gum takes a little bit of time to activate. Now, we're going to set it on low speed, and here is our egg white powder. Then I'm just going to spoon it in. A little bit, a spoon at a time. And just let it kind of get wet. Because this stuff will fly all over the place if you put it in too fast and start the machine, okay? I did that to knock the sides of the mixture down. Like I said, a little at a time. Make sure it gets wet. This egg white powder, it clings to everything. There we go. That was a half a cup of egg white powder. Now, Now that it's pretty much wet, you can see it's balling up in a ball on the beater, so we have to get it knocked down. So we're going to speed it up again. For about 15 seconds. At this point, you want to be careful over mixing it because you don't want to destroy all the beautiful little microscopic air bubbles that we've created. Okay? So we're going to take this off the mixer. Excuse me. Let me get us over here where you can see what's going on. You can see this is, at this point, very, very stiff. This is really just the easiest way to get most of it off the beater is just to shake it loose. Trying to scrape it with a scraper is just frustrating and pointless. You know, I mean, you can if you want to, but... Now, here is our last ingredient. Here's our baking powder. We're putting that in last because we want it. It will have, it's a double-acting baking powder, so it's going to have one reaction when it hits the water, the moisture in the egg yolks, and I don't want to lose all of that lift. It will rise again once it's hot in the oven, but I want to preserve all the lift I can. Okay, now, this is called, if you've done any French cooking or any professional baking, you may know, this is called liaison, where you have a loose mixture and a stiff mixture, and you put a little bit of the stiffer mixture in with the looser mixture, or vice versa, a little bit of the looser mixture in with the stiffer mixture. And we're sacrificing a little bit of the air bubbles in this scoop of egg whites in order to get the procedure started, so to speak. So what we're doing is we're creating the egg yolk mixture. We're bringing it closer in texture to the egg white mixture. And that is going to facilitate the blending. That means we're going to have to stir it less. And that means we're going to lose less loft. And that means your bread is going to be fluffier and more bread-like. Okay? So now we're just going to pour this all into our big mixing bowl. I'm kind of compulsive when it comes to scraping out a mixing bowl, so please bear with me. Now, folding down through the middle, up through the side, and turn over, okay? Or down through the side, up to the middle, and turn over. So down to the bottom, bring it up, turn it over. Down to the bottom, bring it up, turn it over. This is the fold. This is how you want to do this, because if you just get in here and start working it around like that, you're going to deflate the egg whites. That's going to give you dense, tough bread. That is unpleasant. And in my opinion, there's not really any point in making something, putting out the effort, if it's not going to taste good. So I'm going to finish this up with my whisk. Just bring it up, knock it off, bring it up, knock it off. The tines of the whisk actually help blend the batter. Make sure you get all the way down to the bottom. because the egg whites, obviously being full of air, are lighter than the egg yolk mixture, and they will sink to the bottom unless you really get there. Now, it does not have to be perfectly blended. I don't know if you can see this. There are a few little pale streaks of egg white. There's one right there, but it's 85–90% blended. Now, here we go. We're going to pour this into our pan. There's still a few little lumps of egg white. If there's a big lump, you can just kind of mush it around with your spatula. Like I said, it does not have to be perfect. In fact, making it perfect often results in overmixing. And it's better to have it a little bit undermixed than overmixed. As I have said, I'm kind of compulsive with scraping out bowls. Went to cooking school and we had a Belgian head chef, and he was compulsive about scraping out bowls, and he expected everybody else to be compulsive about scraping out bowls. And he made the point, which is, was a good point, that if you're doing recipes on an industrial scale, not scraping out a bowl could mean you've wasted maybe up to 2 or 3 servings of a particular food. And, if you're running a restaurant where margins are slim to begin with, that could eat up your profits. Really cut seriously into your profits for a particular dish. So I never forgot that. So now, you'll remember we did not grease the sides of our pan. That is because we want the mixture to stick to the sides of the pan. And the reason we want that is because it will help the rise. So what I like to do is I like to push, the mixture up against the sides of the pan so that it's got a little bit of a divot in the middle, because the middle is going to rise higher than the sides anyway. So I don't know if you can see, but the center is a little bit shallower than the edges. Make sure your fingers are clean before you do that. Okay, here we are. This is our bread. We're going to walk over to the oven, which has been preheated to 350 degrees, of course. And we're going to put it in on the center rack of a 350 degree preheated oven. And we're going to set our timer to 20 minutes, at which point we're going to check it. It may not be done in 20 minutes, but that's when we need to check it, because sometimes it cooks faster than others. It's hard to predict what eggs are going to do, so you always check early. So that's, timer, 20 minutes. Okay, folks, you don't want to sit here and watch a timer countdown for 20 minutes. So once again, I'm going to pause the video and I'll be back. Hello there, precious friends. Hi, we are down to the wire, and in just a second, our timer is going to go off and we're going to check the progress of our carnivore bread. There we are. And it looks like we got it just about right. Wow, look at that. Look at that color. Isn't it lovely? It looks like cornbread. So what we're going to do is we're going to take it over here since it's done. And we're going to look at this. What is this interesting contraption I have over here? Well, when the bread first comes out of the oven, the matrix is very, very unstable while it's warm. So what we're going to do is we're going to take an old trick from the angel food cake school, and we're going to, cool it upside down on a lifted rack so that air can get underneath it. And that's going to have to cool for probably about 15 minutes. It should always be cooled upside down, just like an angel food cake. For the very much the same reasons as an angel food cake should be cooled upside down. And if you're familiar at all with angel food cakes, you'll also realize that the sides of the baking tin are not greased for angel food cakes either, for exactly the same reasons, because they are based on leavening largely with beaten egg whites. So that accounts for the similarities. So again, this is going to have to cool for at least 5 minutes, probably better for 10 minutes, because you want the foam, or what we call in baking terms the matrix, to be able to cool enough to set. As long as it's warm, it will be very soft and very fragile. And what we're doing here is we are allowing gravity to help us keep the mass light and fluffy. Okay, so it's not going to sink down into the pan because gravity is pulling that way on it and not pushing and not that way on it. Okay, so cool upside down for between 5 and 10 minutes, and then we'll be back and we'll depan it, and I'll show you what it looks like. All right, between 5 and 10 minutes. See you in a bit.